Well, good morning, everyone. Today we're honored to welcome some very special guests to City Hall. First with us is the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. The Vice President, as you know, is leading the Obama administration's efforts to implement and enact the kind of common sense gun safety measures that most Americans clearly want, and we've been doing everything we can to support him. And I will say that Joe has been a stand-up guy. He is a believer in this. He did when he was in Congress, and now in the White House. Joe Biden understands what this country needs, and he's been willing to stand up and say so and fight for it. We're also joined by a number of people whose lives have been deeply scarred by gun violence. Last December 14th, Chris and Lynn McDonald's daughter Grace and Neil Heslin's son Jesse Lewis were among 20 children who walked through the doors of Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, and who never came home. Chris, Lynn, Neil, thank you for being with us today. We're also joined by Teresa Russo and Bill Lukehart, Jill and Joyce Russo, Matthew Russo, and Anthony Lusardi III. They're here to bear witness to the memory of another victim of Sandy Hook shootings, their daughter, stepdaughter, sister, and girlfriend, Lauren Russo. She was a permanent substitute teacher in the first grade at Sandy Hook Elementary School and was one of the 6 adults at the school gunned down as she tried to shield students there. So thank you to all of you for joining us as well. As a parent, quite honestly, I can't imagine what the past 3 months have been like for all of those who lost loved ones at Sandy Hook, and how hard it is for you to be with us today. I appreciate your courage, and I think you bear testimony to the fact that this country has to do something. You're not here just for your loved ones. You're here for not only those who are killed and their families, but those who are killed across this country. We have to pull together here and stop this carnage. There is a Jewish proverb which tells us that remembrance is the secret of redemption, and the lesson is if we ignore the horrors of the past, we are doomed to repeat them. But if we remember them and if we learn from them, we can redeem ourselves from their grip. And that's why all of us are here today, because we believe that we have a responsibility to help free our country from the gun violence that takes lives and breaks hearts every single day, all year round. What happened at Sandy Hook Elementary School sent a shockwave across the country. It gripped us especially hard, I think, because every parent thought, there but for the grace of God go my children. In the days and weeks after the shootings, more and more people began demanding action in Washington, and our bipartisan coalition, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, helped to make sure their voices were heard. And I think it's fair to say those voices were heard. President Obama and Vice President Biden put forward a comprehensive package of gun safety reforms, and we worked together to win support for it in Congress. We remain optimistic that Congress will take action this spring when they come back from recess, because the American people could not be any clearer about where they stand. In a recent poll conducted by our Mayor's Coalition, we found that in 41 key congressional districts across the nation, 89% of likely voters approve of background checks for all gun sales, and 86% of voters approve such background checks in polls in a national cross-section of 21 states. And that's in line with other recent polls that have found that more than 90% of Americans support background checks for all gun buyers. And polling overseen by Republican Frank Luntz has found that 82% of gun owners, including 74% of National Rifle Association members, support requiring criminal background checks for anyone purchasing a gun. There's no real debate among the American people. Around the country, Americans understand that requiring a background check for every gun sale is just good common sense. And some states are taking action, including New York, thanks to Governor Cuomo, and Colorado, thanks to Governor Hickenlooper, who's seen such terrible mass murders. And in Connecticut, Governor Malloy has proposed, and legislators appear prepared to act on, firearms safety reforms as well. They include making private gun sales subject to background checks, limiting the size of high-capacity ammunition magazines, and strengthening anti-gun trafficking measures. Newtown families have played a big role in advancing this proposed legislation. They can speak from firsthand pain. But such state action is not enough. There is a national problem, because guns sold in states with weak gun laws are all too often found crossing state lines and are used to commit crimes elsewhere. So we really need national leadership in Washington if we're going to stop this scourge. Thankfully, there has been some encouraging progress. For example, last week, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted in favor of a number of reforms, including a measure to expand background checks to private gun sales, which is how some 40% of gun purchases in the nation are made. More than 6.5 million gun sales during 2012 alone. There is no question that if this becomes law, it will keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them. It will reduce violent crime. It will save lives. We know that's true because in states that already require background checks on private sales, the rate of women murdered by an intimate partner armed with a gun is 38% lower than in states that don't have such background checks. The rate of firearm suicide is 49% lower, and the rate of firearm assaults, including attempted murders, is 17% lower. So there's no doubt that requiring background checks for all guns sales saves lives, and there's no doubt that the American people support it. The only question is whether Congress will have the courage to do the right thing, or whether they will allow more innocent people, including innocent children, to be gunned down. It has been 97 days since Newtown. In that time, we estimate that more than 3,000 Americans have been murdered with guns. Almost none of the victims generated national headlines, but each murder was a tragedy for the victim's family and for the community. If Congress does nothing, another 12,000 people will be murdered with guns this year alone. We just cannot let that happen. And it's up to us, all of us, to convince members of Congress that it's in everyone's interest to act now. Now, before I turn the floor over to the Vice President, let me just say that there's no better person to be leading this effort in Washington than Vice President Biden. When he was in the Senate, he was a leader in getting the original background check bill through Congress and in drafting the original assault weapons ban. And even though restrictions on military-style weapons will not be part of the bill that goes to the floor of the U.S. Senate, it will get a vote by the full Senate as an amendment to the bill. And everyone's going to have to stand up and say yay or nay. And then the rest of us have to decide just how we feel about people and their stands. We will do everything to win support for it. And I know the White House will be doing everything that they can, too. And we're going to continue giving the Vice President all the support we can. And we thank him for his leadership and for coming here to stand with us today. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me begin by saying that there has been no support that has been more consequential than the support coming from Mayor Bloomberg. It has been immense, and it is organized, it is committed, and it is consequential. And let me start by saying that I was told in 1992, when I introduced many of these reforms, that there is no way you never beat the gun lobby. It's not possible. Well, in 1994, we did. In 1994, reason prevailed, and we passed an assault weapons ban, a limitation on the size of magazines, and a number of other measures, including expanding the so-called Brady Bill and background checks. And one thing I want to lay to rest at the outset, they worked. They all had a positive impact on public safety. They all had a positive impact on public safety. I did an interview yesterday saying, well, the impact on each and went down to each one was only this, that, or the other. I said, that's like saying we shouldn't have taken lead out of gasoline because it didn't end global warming. It had a positive impact. It wasn't the whole answer. Combined, these are common sense approaches that, ironically, Mr. Mayor, in the polling data we've done recently, the American people already think that these gun safety proposals are in place. The American people, a significant number, already think they're universal background checks. They already think that anyone buys multiple guns has to be reported. They already think, if you could just go down the list. So the irony here is what we're proposing is simply common sense that the American people, in addition to the polls that the mayor cited, which I was going to mention, will not repeat, in addition to that polling data, there is polling underneath it that says, but guess what? We think you've already done that. And so and there's not one single thing being proposed, not one, that infringes upon anyone's Second Amendment constitutional right. Not one. And so I'd like to take a moment at the outset to not only thank the mayor, but thank the people standing behind me. Presumptuous to say, but we've actually become good acquaintances and friends. We've met many times so far. And I want to tell you that, emphasize what the mayor said. And I know you know it, but bears repeating. It takes an enormous amount of courage to be here. And you say, well, what's the courage? Well, I haven't lost a child. I understand that every time you show up at something ranging from a memorial service or to talk about the circumstance under which your child was lost, it comes back to you in a flash, as if they got that phone call yesterday. And I told you before, I don't know how you do it, but you do it. You do it. And you're one of the reasons why there's all these pieces of legislation passed through the Judiciary Committee and why we have a fighting chance. And so, when you think about Grace and Jesse and these two beautiful little babies, as they were beautiful little babies, and Lauren, who was not merely a teacher, this is a woman who, if this happened on a battlefield, she'd get a commendation. She'd be getting, literally, and not figuratively, she'd be getting a commendation for her bravery in trying to protect her comrades, in this case, trying to protect these little angels. 3 months ago, a deranged man walked into Sandy Hook Elementary School with a weapon of war. That's what he walked in with a weapon of war. And that weapon of war has no place on American streets, and taking it off American streets has no impact on one's constitutional right to own a weapon. Even no less than Justice Scalia in the last decision acknowledged that the government has a right to limit certain weapons from being able to be possessed by American citizens. This is not a constitutional issue. If you notice, when the ban was in place last time, there was not a constitutional challenge that went anywhere to the existence of the ban. So let's get this straight. This is not about anybody's constitutional right to own a weapon. For all those who say we shouldn't and can't ban assault weapons, for all those who say the politics is too hard, how can they say that? When you take a look at those 20 beautiful babies and what happened to them, and those 6 teachers and administrators. This same young man, he not only came loaded with, armed with an assault weapon, a weapon of war, he came loaded with one 30-round magazine after another, one after another. An estimated 150 bullets were fired by this young man. And the police responded in 2.5 minutes. As my friends behind me did, I met with those state police officers. I met with them. I met with them privately. All you had to do was look into their eyes and see that vacant stare of how fundamentally impacted they were. They were impacted. Some of them needing some help. And tell me that you can't take off the street these weapons of war? For all those who say we shouldn't or couldn't ban high-capacity magazines, I just asked them one question. Think about Newtown. Think about Newtown. Think about how many of these children or teachers may be alive today had he had to reload 3 times as many times as he did. Think about what happened out in where Gabby Gifford, my good friend, was shot and mortally wounded. Think about when that young man had to try to change the clip. Had he only had a 10-round clip when he changed the clip and fumbled and had it knocked out of his hands, how many more people would have been alive? And tell me how it violates anyone's constitutional right to be limited to a clip that holds 10 rounds instead of 30, or an Aurora 100. This is a false choice is being presented to the American people by those who are taking on our position here. Look, folks, we have a responsibility to act. The loudest voices have to be for those beautiful babies. The loudest voices have to be for those silenced voices. Close to 3,000 since Newtown, gunned down on American streets and homes and neighborhoods. You know, it's time for the political establishment to show the courage your daughter showed. And it doesn't take 1/10 the courage your daughter exhibited. I was saying to one of the men you're about to hear from, you know, it must be awful being in public office and concluding that, even though you might believe you should take action, that you can't take action because of the political consequence you face. What a heck of a way to make a living. I mean it sincerely. What a heck of a way to have to act. The message I want to get across, Mr. Mayor, is the risk does not exist as it's exaggerated today, because the vast majority of the American people, the vast majority of gun owners, the vast majority, even close to a majority of NRA members who only represent 4 million of the gun owners in America, think what the mayor has been pushing and the president has proposed is just simple common sense. It will not solve every problem. It will not end every gun death, but it will substantially reduce it. And it matters. It matters. Even if one of the people standing behind me, even one of their children were alive because of what we've done. These are common sense proposals. They are, we're talking about banning assault weapons, limiting high capacity magazines, passing real universal background checks. Gun trafficking legislation will allow the police the opportunity to be able to deal more rationally with straw sales, those sales where people go in, buy multiple guns, and then sell them to the bad guys. Mental health, a significant commitment to mental health, and school safety. One of the reasons why the mayor has been so successful in this town is not only his innovation, but you have a whole hell of a lot of cops. That's the reason. The cops matter. The so-called Biden crime bill put 100,000 cops in the street. There's 30,000 badges sitting in a drawer today because of the economic difficulty of localities as a consequence of the recession. We propose adding back another 1,500 of them. Doesn't move at all. 15,000 of them. But cops matter. They matter. It impacts. So there's no one thing we can do, but I'm absolutely confident, and I'm not going to rest, nor is the president, until we do all of these things. All of these things. Enhance the safety of the American people, and do not diminish one iota, not one iota, any constitutionally guaranteed right of any American. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Vice President, I think that you've spoken for the whole country, and you and the president should be congratulated on having the courage to stand up. And I thought you couldn't be more right when you say, in the end, what Congress has to decide is it politically popular, or is it what in their hearts they know is the right thing to do? We all grew up learning the lesson. We are on this earth together. We have to protect each other. We certainly have to protect our fellow citizens and our families. And the ways to do that is to do what the Supreme Court has said is perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment, that the Vice President and I and all elected officials, I suppose, are charged with protecting. And that is continue to have people have the right to bear arms, but to do it responsibly, not to put weapons of war, which should only be handled by trained military personnel on the battlefield, in the hands of people in the streets. That doesn't protect anybody. That just leads to disaster. And making sure that people who are minors, have criminal records, substance abuse problems, or psychiatric problems don't get their hands on guns because they just are not suitable to people to have arms and to use them responsibly, which the vast bulk of gun owners do, and which the vast bulk of gun dealers want them to do, as a matter of fact. Let me invite a few of the guests from Newtown to speak. First, Chris and Lynn McDonald for joining us today. Thank you. Would you say a few words?
What matters is people, leaders with moral courage. Lynn and I want to thank you, Vice President Biden, and you, Mayor Bloomberg. We are strengthened by your resolve and deeply appreciative of your commitment for action to reduce the epidemic of gun violence.
Thank you. We were not experts on gun safety before the shootings in Newtown, and we do not presume to be experts now, but we do know about loss, and we feel an immense sense of responsibility to our daughter Grace to try and help bring about change. In the immediate aftermath of the shootings, there was a sense of what happened in our town might be a tipping point, and that real, meaningful progress in the area of gun safety might result. And we know that a lot of good people are working very hard to try to make this happen, and we thank them for that. We'd ask everyone who has power to influence legislation in this area, and of course, those whose job it is to vote on the legislation, to ask themselves if they are doing enough to bring about real and meaningful change, and if they are not, to ask themselves, why not? We see that on a completely unrelated issue, a prominent senator has changed his view because he gained a new perspective formed by his own personal connection to that issue. For those of you, for whatever reason, are inclined to do something very little in support of gun control, we ask you to try to gain your new perspective by thinking about the unthinkable, which is unfortunately our reality. This isn't about completely eliminating the possibility of another Newtown. Unfortunately, very little in life is certain. However, if together we can make real progress and bring about meaningful change so that it is far less likely that others will have to die so young, so senselessly, and then shouldn't we be doing everything we can to bring about that change? Thank you.
I'd also like to thank Neil Heslin for being with us today. Neil, will you say a few words?
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Vice President Biden and Mayor Bloomberg for all their efforts and support to Newtown and try to make a change. On December 14th, was the last day I saw my son alive. And I don't wish this upon anybody, what I had to go through or any of the other victims' families had to go through. I ask everybody to just stand up and speak out, and Congress to step up and make a change. There needs to be a ban on assault weapons and weapons of war and high-capacity magazines. Those weapons have no purpose or no use on the streets or in our schools. My son Jesse's life was taken by a cowardly, deranged person with an assault weapon. And no child deserves to be murdered or brutally slaughtered the way these children were. And quite honestly, I'm really ashamed to see that Congress doesn't have the guts to stand up and make a change and put a ban on these type of weapons and universal background checks and address the mental health issues that we have in this country. And I never thought my son would be a victim. I never thought something like this could ever happen in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. But it did. And it could happen to any one of your children or grandchildren in your hometown or your neighborhood. And I ask for everybody's support to help make a change. And I ask that Congress makes a change and to help prevent this from ever happening again. These were innocent little babies. And they had no instinct of survival or self-defense. And Adam Lanza went into that school knowing that day. He knew that they were the least resistant. They had no means of defending themselves. And they carried out a merciless, cowardless act. And I wish it never upon anybody what I have to go through or these other families have had to go through. Thank you very much.
Let me thank the McDonald, Heslin, and Russo families for being here. I don't think any of us can truly feel the pain that they have had to endure. I just think that what we can do as fellow human beings is try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. We can't bring back their loved ones, but we certainly can do something in their memory so that their tragedy will, if not be in vain, at least it will be the last. And I once again want to thank the Vice President and the President for standing up, and for those members of Congress that have the courage to stand up. And if you want to make a difference, you've got to pick up the phone, call your congressperson, call your senator, and say, let me tell you, this is the deciding issue for me. If you stand up and try to prevent this from happening again, I will support you. And if you do not, I will support whoever runs against you, no matter who they are or what party they are. That is the only ways you are going to make a difference here. Congress just has to get some courage, and it's up to us as Americans and as fellow human beings to sort of give them that courage. Thank you very much.